Hello, everyone. I'm Charles Stevens, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Count and Error Project, or CNP. And I want to welcome you to the Louis Graham Virtual Roundtable. I convened this roundtable to discuss the legacy and the impact of Louis F. Graham. Louis was an extraordinary researcher, policy advocate, practitioner, and friend. His work, his contributions to the fields of mental health, sexual health, policy, and culture, and his passion for elevating the voices of Black men remain necessary and relevant. This roundtable will explore Louis's legacy, but also his foundation and his evolution, his interests, and the experiences that shaped his intellectual imagination. With that, I want to jump in and invite my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Justin Smith. I use he, him pronouns, and I serve as the director of the Campaign to End AIDS at Positive Impact Health Centers in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm also a doctor of public health student at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health in Boston. I'm so glad to be here to celebrate the life and the legacy of my friend Louis Graham.
Hi, my name is Lance McCready, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Leadership, Higher and Adult Education at University of Toronto. I'm affiliated with the Adult Education and Community Development Program. I'm also the director of the Transitional Year Program, which is an access program for mature students who have faced barriers to admissions to higher education. I'm really excited to be here and be in conversation with Justin and with Charles. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, Lance, I wanted to begin with you just as we explore Louis Graham's intellectual and academic trajectory, his path, his journey. I think in many ways, one of those early points where it was his time at Carleton College, where you two met. And I wanted to just start with you and just ask, how did you, well, first of all, how did you meet Louis? How did you meet?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if I think Louis was in I taught a multicultural education class. Carleton College, for, those of you who have never heard of this small liberal arts college in Northfield, Minnesota. It's a highly regarded liberal arts college. It's usually in the top 10, but it is in Northfield, Minnesota. So a lot of people would think, why would you go to college in Northfield, Minnesota? And generally the people that go there want a highly interactive undergraduate experience, where they want to sort of be in conversation with their professors, and they want to, it's kind of a nerd school too. I call it that too, and all power to the nerds. So Louis and I met in a class, in this multicultural education class, and I was coming out of graduate school. I graduated in 2002, and I started teaching at Carleton College then, and I was in the Department of Educational Studies. And I remember one of the things going back and teaching at Carleton is I wanted to be different than some of the professors I'd had there as an undergraduate, and that I wanted to be an out, sort of openly gay Black professor. And that I wasn't going to, I had other Black gay professors when I was a student there, but they were not out and they weren't sort of open. And I kind of wanted to show up differently as a mentor and as a professor for students. So I think that was one of the things that Louis and I connected from. I think in that multicultural education class, I spoke openly about some of my experiences at Carleton College as a Black gay undergrad. And Louis and I began sort of talking after class, and he eventually became, I think, probably one of my first, or he might have made himself announce that he was going to be my research assistant. So yeah, that's how we first met.
That's amazing. Could you talk a bit more about what Lewis was like as an undergrad? I think you kind of got at that with he announced that he was going to be your researcher, your student assistant, your research assistant. But could you just talk a bit about like some of the things that made him unique, some of the qualities that stood out about him to you?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think Lewis was not even at that time. I mean, early 2000s, I guess there's a lot more openness, I guess, more openness to talking about sort of gender and sexuality and sort of really being sort of out with being gay, bi, trans, more so then. But when I went to Carleton College, there was an LGBTQ student group, but we met in the basement of a church and it was secretive and, you didn't want people to know. And so I was really struck by, coming back and teaching in 2002, this is a new era. Lewis is out and open. And so I thought that was one of the things that distinguished him. He was also coming from LA. And I remember he was coming from Los Angeles and also having been schooled in predominantly Black communities too. That's something we talked about. Like, so, unlike me, I was sort of a scholarship kid who got scholarships to private schools, basically since I was in first grade. And so I was usually one of the only Black students in the class but Lewis went to school with, mostly other Black students. So we talked about that sort of being sort of what it was like sort of growing up, coming of age, identifying as gay. We talked about sort of our experiences in our families. And I think, so basically what I'm saying is like Lewis's openness really sort of struck me. He was open and he didn't come from, and I think that's what I was very drawn to. I don't like, listen to me when I say I don't really like shame or coming from a place for shame. What is, but I'm often drawn to people that are not coming from a place of shame, if that makes sense. And so I, of course, want to be a mentor and help people work through their sort of shame. But I think Lewis had done a lot of, I don't really know how he had done this work, but he had done some work. So that's one of the things that sticks out to me about Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you. He used to tell me, he told me that you two were also involved or he was a leader in this group. I think it was called Men of Color or something like
Yeah.
that, Carlton. And that you were also, yeah. Could you talk about that experience?
Yeah. So there used to be this,
And also provide like I know you did this a little bit, but could you provide a sort of timeline? So what years were these? Also,
I think this is basically because I left Carleton in 2006. I think this is around 2004. I think so. As you may or may not, if you're familiar with the predominantly white liberal arts college experience, often they do activities, retreats, events for students of color as a way of providing support, sort of having community, because being in the predominantly white sort of college environment can feel very marginalizing, and you don't always feel like you have the support. The academic experience is different, and so Carleton used to organize these Men of Color retreats. And sort of, I was a faculty member that really wanted to be involved in creating kind of supports and networks for students. And so I used to be a part of planning those retreats and would facilitate different sessions with those retreats. And sort of Lewis also took an active sort of role in those. And again, one of the things that was different about Lewis is that he was really, as we'll talk about his research later, but he was really grounded in doing his work in communities of color and specifically Black communities. So that wasn't something I had to convince him of. I think he had some experiences of gender-based violence in high school, but he wasn't. But he was very resilient through those, and he had come through them not as, for some people, it's like avoiding and going away from sort of Black communities, right? For some Black gay men, that's where their sense of safety. I'm being really, I mean, maybe I'm jumping into too many issues, but right. But Louis, I was always struck by, he was going to be in there in that Men of Color retreat, and he was going to talk to sort of all the heterosexual identified Black male students, the ones that were questioning, the Asian, Latino. He was just in there. So, and he was able to have those conversations and facilitate those conversations. And I'll also say that I started doing some workshops, like exploring the experiences of men of color on predominantly white liberal arts college campuses. And that's some of the stuff that Louis became my research assistant for. And he was preparing materials, and he would sort of co-facilitate some workshops with me. The last thing I'll say about sort of Louis's undergrad, he had a real struggle with, he came wanting to be a bio major. And he, as a lot of students of color did, struggled in that Carleton curriculum, partly because a lot of times, if you don't come from a real elite sort of school, secondary school background, then you'll experience the curriculum at Carleton is extremely accelerated. So Louis was spending a lot of time studying. He wasn't always getting the grades that he wanted in bio. And he was trying to figure out what the implications of that were going to be, because he still, was really committed to public health. And so he was thinking about medical school. So he wasn't sure how that was all going to work. And at that time in those colleges and universities, they sometimes advised Black students in particular that had aspirations for med school but weren't doing well in the actual science classes to major in something else. And like major in AFAM studies, or major in English, or major in a non-science, and then go back afterwards and sort of do those intensive science sort of courses, and then apply to med school as a way to sort of preserving your GPA. So Louis and I had a lot of conversations about that. But I remember him staying really resilient in that bio major.
If I'm not mistaken, and now it's all coming back to me, I think while he was at Carleton, he did a study abroad in South Africa. And there's something about the study abroad he did in South Africa that connected the dots to him for public health. Like he recognized that he was interested not just in individual health, but also, or personal health, but also very interested in health from a community or population level. And I think I remember that was sort of when he had this epiphany that he would tell me later when we'd meet, that was kind of part of it. And I imagine also his experiences in leadership and activism at Carleton might have also helped sort of shape his political agenda in terms of how he thought about the relationship of health and structures and barriers and, all the
stuff. And they don't really teach you that. I mean, I still think sometimes they don't as an undergrad. It's very much like you're a bio major or a chem major, or like you can do ecology, but there's not really always an entry to public health. And for a lot of students of color as undergrads, this is the connection they're trying to make, is between sort of, healthcare and society, or sort of public health and society. Often the professors at undergrad, these like in the, the bio department, and I study plants, or I study these things. They're not people that are really involved in public health. So I think that I actually ended up sort of, mentoring or advising a couple of students that were facing that, not doing well in bio, wanted to do something with public health, wanted to have an impact, didn't know what the implications, didn't know what that meant.
This is a good time to bring in Justin. I see he's nodding.
Yeah.
Justin, I'm so grateful that you also were able to be a part of this conversation, because I think you connect a very important thread in Louis's evolution as a scholar. Could you just talk a bit about, like, how did you and Louis meet in North Carolina?
Yeah. So I just want to put a pin into some of the threads that Lance was sharing, and as you're narrating, Louis's kind of undergrad journey, like there are so many pieces that were so resonant with my own journey at Brown, and we can talk about that later. But and these are things that I didn't know about his past, but I think it all makes a lot of sense. Hearing kind of that, ex pre med sort of commonality that we had. How I first met Louis was, I believe it was either late 2007 or early 2008. I don't have a exact date in my mind. But I was working for University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill at the time, and I was running an HIV. It was a study, but it was really done more in kind of a blend of a service project, but also research. And I had gone to give a presentation at the Guilford County Health Department. And so Guilford County is where Greensboro, North Carolina is, the county where Greensboro resides. And that's where Louis was doing his Doctor of Public Health at University of North Carolina, Greensboro. And they were doing kind of a series of community-focused presentations on HIV. So I was there presenting about my work. He was there talking about some of his work. And we were also joined by one of his colleagues, Warner McGee, who was also one of our ancestors now. And I just remember how remarkable it was that me, Louis, Warner, and my colleague, Derek Matthews, who's also another Black gay scholar that does work on HIV, who was doing his PhD at UNC at the time, that here we are, 4 young Black gay men at this, giving presentations about our work on HIV. And that was just such a powerful thing, just to have 4 young Black gay men sort of taking up space in this kind of, very drab institutional public health building. And so, I think we were all kind of struck by that moment. And so after we all, gave our presentations, we were kind of talking and saying that, like, how is it that we didn't know each other before this? Which was like, this is crazy. But we knew that we wanted to try to, um, maintain a connection, given that, we're all in graduate school, all working on similar issues, all concerned about kind of the health and well-being of Black gay men. And so that was a really, kind of powerful moment, especially because I think I felt how fortunate I was that, like, there were other Black gay men in sort of my academic space, that, even though we're in North Carolina, which isn't necessarily known as a Black gay mecca in the same way that Atlanta or DC are, that we still had this, kind of burgeoning community. And so that was really exciting. And I think the thing that really stood out to me about Louis was just how, like, evolved his thinking was in terms of how he was thinking as a researcher, and I was just really kind of blown away with just how incisive he was. And, it was almost intimidating because I was just like, wow, like, you're, you're where I think that I would be in like 10 years, and you're only, 3 years ahead of me in school, basically. Um, And so I was just really impressed. And I was like, this is someone that I want to make sure that I kind of keep close, because there's a lot that I think that we can learn from each other. And so that was sort of the impetus for us to try to informally create sort of a network. We called it the North Carolina Black gay men's research group. So kind of modeled after some of the national. There was a Black gay research group that was kind of operating on a national level. So we thought like, what could that look like if we did that sort of on a local scale in North Carolina? Frankly, it didn't really necessarily get much bigger than kind of our small cohort. But I think, I think about when, Louis was setting up his dissertation and wanted to kind of tap into us as an advisory committee to help him, think through his project. And that really just, again, kind of was another way that he showed that he was committed to really making sure community was a part of all the things that he was doing. And it really turned into a lot of, kind of social things too. Like uh, one of the other things that, I was involved with in North Carolina was this group called Brothers Who Brunch. And it was basically just a group of Black gay men that would get together once a month and have brunch together. Lewis was part of that. We did a lot of kind of crisscrossing to other Black gay cultural events. Like, as I was preparing for this talk, I was going through emails, and there was this long kind of email exchange that we had, getting excited about going to see, the first reading of E. Patrick Johnson's Sweet Tea when he came and performed that in North Carolina. We got to experience that together. So, yeah, it was just sort of to have someone that I could share community space with, but also as someone that I saw as kind of an intellectual mentor in many ways. And so, it was really great to kind of have him in that community. And I remember when he moved to University of Michigan, I was emailing one of my friends who was in my MPH program, kind of cool, like, what I call a white woman of color. uh, and I was like, you need to make sure that you meet Lewis while you're at Michigan. And I remember writing to her and just saying, like, he is as brilliant as he is humble. And, I think he would be a wonderful person for you to be in contact with. And she was like, oh, yeah, I already know Lewis. And, like, she kind of like went on and on about how, wonderful he was. And, I think that's kind of just how he showed up in the world as someone that was incredibly gifted. And I think for me, what is sort of there's so many things that are tragic about his story, but I think what I find most tragic is sort of the death of his possibility, and what I know that he would be able to contribute if he were here, and that's something that I feel with so many of our Black gay ancestors, right? Um, so I'll stop there.
Thank you. Yes, I think one of the things that Lewis brought to research, but also what he offered in the realms of practice, pretty much all the fields he touched, was a level of seriousness and a level of seriousness about our community. And I mean, I
Absolutely.
always say when people meet me and they think that I'm doing too, I was like, you should have met Lewis. Like, if you think, no matter how serious you think I am and how whatever, like the level of seriousness, Lewis was that time, and he kind of got my seriousness up, like that the community, that our communities deserve and require that level of seriousness. And there's a care in the seriousness. When I say serious, I mean rigorous. I mean,
Yep.
Of course you're like know the literature in the field that you're operating in, and of course you're going to, even something like data collection, you're going to pay very, like, just everything required a level of care and
Yep.
attention. And I definitely hear that loudly and clearly what you're sharing.
Yeah, just to really echo that again, as I was preparing for tonight, and I was looking through kind of our email exchanges. Um, I remember there's two that really stood out. So there was one email that was kind of in the early days of CNP, when there was sort of like a listserv that CNP kind of operated through, and there would be studies that were shared and people would comment on it. And I just remember very clearly this one study that coming out of some work at Emory, and the way that Lewis really critiqued the paper, but in a very way, and again, it kind of brought that seriousness, but like the way he did it, and like the rigor with which he like picked apart all of the methods and were like, you should have done this other, this advanced modeling technique called structural equation modeling because you had the data to do this and you did it. And these are the things that you missed because you didn't have that analysis. Like it was just, and it was also beautifully written, and so it's like that takes a lot of intellectual heft to be able to thread that needle, to say it so clearly, because it shows that you both understand and are deeply concerned about the community and you have a love for the community, but you also have a deep love and appreciation for the science and the rigor that you need, and if you're going to get the right answers, and I thought that critique of that paper, when he was just like, this is how I would have approached this differently, and this is why this matters, because you sort of get the wrong outcomes if you don't do the analysis this way. I was
Oh,
just really struck by this. So yeah.
we should also be clear for context.
Yeah.
Lewis was born in 1982.
Yep.
So this is like Lewis in his maybe early 30s
Early
at this
30s.
point.
Yeah.
So he's in his early 30s, like with this level of rigor. So it wasn't, and I realized that his age needs to be like he
Absolutely.
passed away. He hadn't turned 40. I think it was 39 when he passed.
Yeah.
So, and this is like 4 years before. No, this is So a lot of this stuff that's happening, he's younger than me. He was younger than me. So, and I'm. So yeah, I just wanted to bring.
No, and I think that's another piece for me, is that that was also something that I was deeply impressed with, where like you have this level of analysis and this rigor to your work at a very young age.
He always loved, like, I mean, he was really, that's what's always so sad to me about some of these sort of institutions, is there are all sorts of Black people that are very like into science, but the way the science is taught and the way it's structured, that it makes us feel like we're not very scientific, or that we're not. I think Lewis struggled a lot with that as an undergrad. He spent a lot of time in the lab. Like, he was hardcore. That's the other thing that always struck me about Lewis, is he liked the science part of it. He wasn't afraid of it. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that I always think that there's lost talent and lost, just opportunities by what is sometimes seen as, Black students not having aptitude for science, it's actually sort of less opportunity or less privilege because of our sort of economic backgrounds. And that's actually another thing I wanted to. I'm just remembering, I talked to Lewis a lot. Lewis didn't come from, from means. He was not from a middle class family. And there was a lot of financial struggles that he was facing. And in terms of, even at one point, he felt he had to, for mental health reasons, take time off from school. And, a lot of what we were talking about was like, things like credit card debt and how to like manage your money. I think I identified with that too, because I think my family was supportive in a way, but financially, I feel like I was on my own since 18, if that makes any sense. It's not like, I didn't live at home. I was paying rent. I was working, and I didn't have the same sort of cushion some folks had, where they sort of lived at home for a long time, So I talked to Lewis. We talked about that and tried to strategize ways. And Lewis was always very creative and very resilient. I mean, he made it. He went to all those schools and all those places and accomplished all professionally, but not with a leg up sort of financially or economically.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that that's really important. Some people see sort of like the end product. They see like, oh, he's a professor in a university. And I guess they often automatically assume that they must have come from a very, strong sort of middle class background. But that wasn't the case with Louis. So I know he had a lot of things that he struggled and tried to navigate and negotiate as a person that didn't come from sort of, a lot of having a lot of financial sort of resources.
Yeah, he taught me how to hustle. And he also, I think one of the was if you believe in your work, if you believe in your ideas, then you need to secure the resources to sustain it. Like I really got that from him. Like he was he was a Bill Gates scholar. Like he was always raising money for his work. And that was one of the things I took. It's like, no, if you believe in your work, if you believe in your ideas, you need to secure the resources to have the impact required for your work. So he was just masterful at like securing fellowships and securing and then grant writing and like all these things. And I think that's just I think that I see a lot of people with good ideas where their ideas aren't able to succeed because they're not able to secure the resources to give their ideas life. And I think Louis definitely understood pretty clearly.
And was willing to play that game. Because some of my colleagues don't like that grant writing or like being adjudicated or judged by sort of these large, mostly not Black, mostly not gay, and having to put your work to be assessed by those sort of reviewers and critiques. But Louis always stood out for me as somebody that wasn't going to let that stop him or believed in his work, as you said, Charles, so much that he's like, I'm going to frame this for this audience. I was just looking at some of his publications. I was like, who Louis was writing about and in some of these academic journals was real different. I mean, there weren't a lot of people writing about sort of Black trans women or writing about sort of Black gay men and psychosocial, and mental health or like all these, because anyway.
I think there's always a cost when you're early. And I think there's always a cost when you're very early. And I think he was just very early to a lot of things. I think he was talking about things and grappling with things. I mean, even 10 years ago, which it seems like a lifetime. No, more than 10 years ago, really, like 15 years ago, even. And like, people weren't really talking about like many of the ideas that he was trying to champion, especially around mental health, just were not it wasn't the zeitgeist at the time. And I think he dealt a lot of barriers because he would have been easily rewarded if he had assimilated more. But I think there was such a belief and conviction in what he was trying to do that he just wouldn't let it, and probably some of its cultural context too. And we're going to get into more of that in some of our other discussions. But I did want to, and we've kind of gotten at sort of his research legacy. But I would be very interested. I know we've talked a lot about different stories about Louis, but is there like one particular memory that stands out for you that helped you understand Louis's project, his research, his commitment? Like, is there like one specific story or memory that you have that you think would kind of paint the picture?
I will say that Louis is in my head to this day a lot when it comes to program development and interventions, because he had a real position around that. So I don't know if this is getting too technical, but I had done a lot of work in like tailoring and adapting programs and interventions that had been developed for other populations. So I was like, let's keep a lot of it, but let's tailor it, adapt it, bring together sort of Black community members to see what needs to be added, taken away, blah, blah, blah. Louis did not believe in that as much. Louis believed in the sort of ground up intervention and doing all the science to do. It was basically like Louis, another way to, in the language we use now, he was just way ahead of his time in terms of program science with Black populations and Black queer populations, right? He was doing that stuff before it was even called program science. But so that is one of the, and that conversation, I remember we had a little back and forth. It was great, but we didn't always agree. When I was here in Atlanta, and I was sort of absent-minded professor. I can't believe this. And I think I left my passport. You remember that? Like, Louis, I left my passport in my hotel room, and Louis actually drove it to the airport and made sure it was got on a plane so I could get it, so I could get it and then get back to Toronto because I couldn't, cross the border without this passport. But anyway, that's one of the things that one of my memories about Louis, that today I'm in some of the program development and interventions that I do, I still have Louis in my head thinking about, what is the basis of this? Is this really grounded in community members' experiences? How am I sort of evaluating it? Like those, I guess that's not, if you're not an academic, those are not the sort of questions you have. But I think that's the privilege, and what was amazing about Louis is that I had another Black gay colleague that I could kind of talk about these things in a more micro way, which today sometimes that doesn't exist in most of the context I'm working in.
Yeah, to build on that story, I think for me, similarly, I remember when he was doing some of the kind of focus groups around his dissertation work and wanted to make sure that his measures were really grounded in community experience. I think what for me was the lesson, I was in a master's program where, it's all built around, community engaged scholarship. But I think that he was the best example I had seen of that. And I think it resonated more strongly with me because you're actually doing this in my own community, right? With people who look and love like we do. And so, again, I think it is just the level of care, the level of rigor that he approached his own work. And, I still aspire to that level of just making sure that this is really built for us if we're doing some work that's supposed to be in service to our own community. And I think, again, at a very, very young age, he understood why that's important. He understood how to do it. And that to me is still something that is just incredibly impressive to me as I think about the legacy that he leaves for all of us. I also think, for my own kind of intellectual development, I remember, I was thinking a lot about like, what would he think about this current moment? Because I think one of the things that Lewis was really early on is kind of understanding and bringing in the concept of critical race theory into public health research. And, over the last, 2 years, just how demonized the, critical race theory and sort of its tenets. And again, it's not done in a good faith effort, right? Like these are all people that have no idea what critical race theory is. But I wonder what he would say to the moment that we're in. But I just am still struck by how early he was into sort of having this conversation about critical race theory and intersectionality, which again, now we kind of take a second nature, but like back in 2010, 2011, when he was sort of bringing this into the public health field, like those weren't really the conversations that people were having. And so he really was at the very kind of intellectual vanguard of that work. And I know in my own, development, I remember we had this email exchange about, how we could extend and deepen that work. What would it mean to incorporate other types of, what he termed critical theories into public health? So like, what would it mean? What would, a queer theory informed public health look like, as one potential kind of extension of that work? But I think what was so powerful was like, he was really engaged with other disciplines and really trying to bring that into public health in a way that was practical. Because I think that was the other piece, was that this wasn't about just like theorizing for theorizing's sake, but it's like, how do we actually do this so that we can actually do better programs, policies, interventions that will improve the health of our people? And I think so many people don't kind of have that that sort of through line. They sort of stay in sort of the headiness, but he was really about like, how does this actually motivate action? I think about a lot of the work that he was doing and understanding the intersection between HIV and the criminal justice system. Again, those are very prescient conversations, because that's something that we're actively talking about now around HIV criminalization, right? But I think he had sort of laid down some of the intellectual foundations for how to think about some of those things. And again, I was reading through some of the emails, and one of them was this really powerful connection of like how Black bodies and Black gay bodies specifically are criminalized within prison systems. And so like I think he just understood a lot of things that I think now people are just sort of getting to it. But he was there back in 2010.
I think the memory that I most carry with me is, well, one of the memories. This is not so much him as a researcher, but this was when we first met. So we met, and I don't think I shared, my story, but I was a program coordinator at Aid Atlanta. Speaking of program science, I was a program coordinator, and there was this intervention that we ran called Many Men, Many Voices, and that was my job. So I would do these sexual health workshops for Black, gay, and bisexual men. And Louis signed up to be a volunteer at the agency I worked for, and they paired us. And it was like love at first sight. It was like we just clicked. It was like, so the memory that I have is, so in that first year I would do these interventions, and we did a retreat. So it was a retreat in the woods where we do the do the workout intervention. And as brilliant as Louis was, I mean, absolutely brilliant, amazing researcher. When I say he had that clipboard out and he had all his little flip flops and he was checking the people out, I mean, he was into all the parts. So not only was he a brilliant researcher, I mean, he was like checking people out. He was helping to do the logistics and moving people. So it wasn't like, oh, I'm too good or I'm too whatever to do all the things like my community engagement stuff. Like I'm about it. He was even better at that than I was. So it was like he was better at programming too. Like he could just jump in there and was just so amazing. And I share that story to say that. So unfortunately, he gave me this thing where I hold researchers to an extremely high standard, and I think he just made me have these expectations now that is not sufficient for you to sit behind your desk, behind your computer, and think and crunch numbers and think that's all you get to do. You get to say you do community work, right? But yeah, thank you. Are there any finals that we want to say before we close out? Just about the legacy of Louis, about what he meant, how he influenced you.
Yeah, just to extend sort of how he shaped my own thinking. I mean, I think I am now in a Doctor of Public Health program in the same way that Louis was when I met him. And I definitely feel like, he is walking with me on this journey that I'm on. And I think that a lot of the questions that we talked about, 10, 12 years ago are still things that I carry with me. And I think even in having this conversation, I'm reminded of how, even though like this program is definitely more focused on sort of policy and management and leadership and kind of more of the practice of public health, it's reminding me that coming to those questions with the level of kind of intellectual curiosity and rigor that, Louis had, is something that I, really want to carry with me. And to really continue to push the field in thinking about how we actually serve the health and well-being of, Black, gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men in the kind of most full fashion. And I think that, if Louis were here today, that's the work that he would be doing. And so, kind of in the words of Essex Hemphill, it's like, when my brother fell, I picked up his weapons, right? And I hope that I can at least carry forth some of kind of the work that he was doing, and to make sure that other Black gay men who are in public health, and not just in public health, but like we all need to know his name. And so I'm just really grateful that, Charles, that you had sort of the foresight to really pull this together, and to make sure that there is, beyond the brilliant papers that Louis left as his legacy, that there is a way that other people can engage with who he was as a man. So thank you for this.
Well said, Justin. I mean, so just sort of riffing off your sort of reflections, I have to, and I want to use Lewis's work more in my own work. In preparing for this, I was just going back and looking at some of his. I was like, gosh, I guess that's what I like Louis too, is because we both are sort of like big picture. And I was like, oh, Louis was interested in family and specifically Black gay men and youth. And I was like, that sounds like me. Like, these are the same things. And I'm sometimes told like that's too much. But I look at Lewis's work and I was like, oh no, like, that is, that's right there. Louis was right there too. So I think that's one of the things that I'm left with. Is just like, say his name more, use his work more,